Good evening. My name is Walter Montero from Coldwell Banker, and welcome to tonight's webinar. The topic, of course, is first-time home buyers, and I want to thank you for attending. I'm a pretty matter-of-fact kind of person, so we're going to get right to the subject at hand in terms of getting into the material. And if you have any questions, we're going to have a screen up with my email and phone number at the end of the presentation, so you can direct us to or you can send any of your questions over to us, and of course we can answer those questions for you with no obligation. And if you want to set up a time to come and see us, by all means, please do so. So the topic, of course, is first-time home buyers, and let's get right into it. What we're going to cover is the home buying process, and as you can see in this first slide here, there are 6 different elements of the home buying process that we're going to cover. So we're going to cover, of course, budgeting, evaluating your needs, the actual shopping process, what to do when it's offer time, what to do after your offer is accepted, and then the final period, which is the firm or the pending period. So in other words, there's no conditions left, and you're just waiting for your house transaction to close. Okay, so let's start off right from the top here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is budget. When we're talking about budget, you need to determine what you can afford. Okay, and when you go out into the marketplace, the last thing you want to do is, find a house you really like, and then put in an offer, say conditional on financing or inspection, and then you go to the bank. They, unfortunately let you down and say, hey, you can't afford this house. You don't qualify for it. So you wanna make sure you qualify for it. Now, your options in terms of qualifying for a mortgage is you can go to a bank, or you can go to a mortgage broker. The one thing we have reservations about banks, of course, is that bank employees work for the bank. So their objective is to try and make the bank as much money. So your best interest may not necessarily be at the top of their scale. So when you talk to a mortgage broker is very similar to an insurance broker. They don't work for any particular bank. Okay, so they have affiliations with banks, they have relationships with banks, but they work for you, the borrower. So they source out or seek out your mortgage options. So the way they do that, of course, is number one question is, what do you got for a down payment? So your down payment is really going to determine what you can buy. Okay, because if you qualify for $1 million mortgage, but you don't have any down payment, then you can't buy it. Okay, so you've got to determine how much do you have for a down payment. That's going to be the first and foremost in terms of qualifying for a mortgage. The other thing, of course, the mortgage broker is going to do, which a lot of times a bank doesn't do, is they verify your income. Okay, they're not just going to take what you say in terms of how much you actually earn. They want to see pay stubs, they want to see T4 slips, that kind of thing, and they're going to ask you for a letter of employment so that at the end of the day, the math is properly calculated, so they can do a calculation in terms of the percentage of your income that you can use towards your mortgage payment. Usually that works out to somewhere between 30 and 40% of your income, 30% for your mortgage, 40% for all of your debts. Okay, but a discussion with a mortgage broker is basically going to determine what you can afford in terms of a payment to service your mortgage. Okay, so the sum total of those two, your down payment plus what you can borrow from the bank, is going to give you your purchase price. Okay, the other thing that you need to keep in mind when you qualify for a mortgage is your credit history or your credit bureau. Very important, especially these days. There's been so many changes in the mortgage arena with regards to qualifying for a mortgage. It's very, very important that your mortgage broker goes over your credit history with you. So when they do that, they're going to look at what your record has been like in terms of paying back your bills. Okay, if you're a little bit sloppy on your credit, that's going to be reflected in that report, which is going to give you a lower score. Sort of the score that banks love to see is somewhere around the 680 mark. Okay, that's a 680 beacon score. That basically means that you've been pretty good in paying your bills. If the score is any less than that, it may mean that you don't qualify with certain lenders. Your options with a mainstream lender may be limited. So you're going to have to take a look at your credit score so you can determine, what kind of rate you're going to pay, and the lending institution that's going to be able to take you on. Okay. Once they have that figured out, this will help them determine your options, and they'll lay those out for you. They'll lay them out for you so you can say, here's Bank A, here's what they offer, here's what they want, here's Bank B, here's what they want, and then they'll go over your options with you. All right. Once you have that determined, the mortgage broker is going to send that into a lender for a pre-approval. Okay, now this is not, like going into a bank where they do a quick math on the calculator and they say, hey, here's what you qualify for. Somebody's actually taken the time to underwrite your file. So they've looked at all your supporting documentation and they've said, hey, we're solid with these people. And if there's any documentation that obviously hasn't been handed in, like a job letter or the verification of down payment, they may give you an approval, a conditional approval, pending being satisfied with those other supporting pieces of information. Okay. The next thing you need to do is, once you've got that figured out, now you know what you can afford, you want to evaluate your needs. Okay, because obviously when you're buying a home, it's not like buying a pair of shoes. You can take them, back to the store if you didn't like them. Once you buy a home, you own it, and you want to make sure that you're going to be happy in it. So I think that this typically warrants an appointment and a visit with a realtor. A realtor is going to help you determine the number of bedrooms you need, the number of bathrooms you need, what kind of style of house you're looking for, whether it's a bungalow or a two-story, or, are you looking for something in a specific neighborhood? Do you need a garage? How old is too old in terms of the age, the yard size, that sort of thing. So, when you take on a property, you've got to keep in mind that when you sell that house, you're going to incur costs. So the last thing you want to do is buy something that's only going to be good for the next 2 or 3 years, because selling that property is going to cost you money, right? So what you want to do is make sure that you don't underbuy, okay, in terms of the type of house you want. But of course, you also don't want to overbuy either. But you don't want to underbuy, because all of a sudden you're going to end up with a property that doesn't suit your needs within 4 to 6 months. The next thing you need to keep in mind is the realtor will present you with the option of signing a buyer representation agreement. Now, a buyer representation agreement is very similar to a listing agreement. So the buyer representation agreement, what that basically states is that you make a commitment to deal with that agent. So you're going to make a commitment to that agent in terms of dealing with them on an exclusive basis. Now, why is this important? Well, first of all, it really opens up your options in terms of what you look at in the marketplace. I know that some buyers have, the mindset that, hey, I don't want to get stuck with any particular agent. I'm just kind of doing it on my own. I'll deal with the listing agent. The problem with that is you don't have anybody particularly taking care of your best interests. Remember that the listing agent has been hired by the seller to get them the most money possible. So it's almost the same type of deal with regards to, going into the bank. Well, that particular agent has been hired by the seller. So their best interests are for the seller. So if you deal with an agent that has you sign a buyer representation agreement, they're going to be looking out for your best interests, of course, in terms of negotiating a deal for you. And they also open up the marketplace in terms of looking at, maybe somebody that they know, a property that isn't listed, or maybe a property that's, for sale by owner. And, they can take care of, making sure they get compensated and all that kind of stuff. Don't worry about that. That part of it, I find many times where the buyer gets penny wise and pound foolish. So sign a buyer representation agreement, because the one thing you got to keep in mind is when you're dealing with an agent, especially a good agent, some agents won't even work with a buyer without this agreement signed, and some will, okay? But the one thing you got to keep in mind is the agent will have customers that deal with buyers that sign agency agreements, and they have customers that don't sign buyer agency agreements. Who do you think they're going to be more loyal to? They're going to be more loyal to the agent or to the buyer that signs buyer agency agreement. So keep that in mind when you're out shopping, and go over the pros and cons of a seller or a buyer representation agreement. They're worth their weight in gold. Okay, so when you're out shopping, the first thing the agent's going to do is he's going to set you up on something we call Mail Monster. And they're going to put you into the MLS under what's called Mail Monster. Mail Monster is basically, they take the criteria, all the questions that they've asked you in terms of what you're looking for, and then they put that into their Mail Monster system. What will happen from there? You will receive emails of listings that come onto the marketplace that meet your criteria. The reason that this is better than just going on your own and looking in Realtor.ca, you will get the updates of the listings in real time. Okay, so that means if the property is listed at 10 o'clock this morning and it gets submitted into MLS, at 10:01 you're going to have an email in your inbox showing that, hey, 123 Main Street is for sale. Call your agent and go and see it. Okay, if you do it by way of Realtor.ca, the one thing that a lot of people forget is Realtor.ca and the MLS system are really two separate entities. Okay, because Realtor.ca only uploads information from the MLS at a certain time every evening. Okay, so in the market that we're in today, we're at a lightning speed market. I've been in the business 30 years. I've never ever seen a market faster than we're operating at right now. Okay, so speed to the marketplace is very, very important. And an hour, 2 hours, a minute can either determine whether you're getting that house or not getting that house. So very important that you get set up on Mail Monster. The next thing, of course, is that we want you to stay within your budget. Okay, and staying within your budget is very important because you don't want to get into a situation where you overpay for a property and then, of course, the deal falls apart because you don't qualify for the financing. Okay, so staying within your budget is very important. So the other question, of course, comes up is, hey, I qualify for a $350,000 purchase price. What price range should you be looking at? Well, I can tell you in the marketplace that we're in today, you certainly shouldn't be looking beyond 350, that's for sure. If you're looking at something for 360 or 370 and thinking you can talk them into taking a 350 offer, that's very likely not the case. In our marketplace, the average, and I'm talking from $1 to $5 million, the average list price to sale price ratio is 99%. So we're in a very tight market here, folks. So for you to get a price down $10 or $20 or $30,000, it's not realistic. It's not going to happen. So keep in mind that to stay within your budget. Actually, you've really got to keep in mind, especially with what's going on in the marketplace, if you're looking at homes for say 310, 320, you'll be surprised that home could very well sell for 350 because there is such a low in listing inventory. There's never been a lower time with listing inventory than right now. And we're getting so many people coming in from outside markets that are coming in from higher markets that are throwing around some money and, primarily coming from the GTA. So they come into Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph, Brantford, and they think, wow, these things are cheap. And they come in guns a-blazing. So you've got to be prepared to compete with those people. So keep that in mind when you're out shopping. Now, the shopping process is really a process of elimination. Okay, so when you're out looking at properties and you get an alert on Mail Monster, the first thing I tell people to do is drive by the property first. Okay, because really in the grand scheme of things, nothing's more frustrating than, you're set up an appointment, you're going out and you're showing your buyer property. You pull up to a property and they go, oh, geez, I hate, the two houses next door, or I don't like this neighborhood, or my ex-husband lives across the street, or, something like that. So make sure you drive by the house first, because then that way, when you're out looking at property, you're not wasting any time. Okay. Now, when you get an alert on a property, don't postpone or delay. We're in a fast moving market, as I said. So you want to make sure that, hey, if you're serious about buying a home, don't postpone or delay. Get out there and look at that property and make a move on it. all right, or eliminate it. That's all we're asking for. Now, when you're out looking at properties with an agent, and you're looking at different homes, I'm going to suggest that you don't look at any more than 5 homes per appointment. And realistically, even if you can whittle that down to 3, it might even be better. Because what I find in my experience, okay, is that buyers start to mix houses together. All right, and they get mixed up. Folks, I've been in the business 30 years. I start mixing houses together. So the last thing you want to do is get confused in this process. So go out, look at 3 to 5 homes, determine whether you want to act on these things or you don't want to act on them, and then move on. Okay, but don't confuse the process with too many homes. Sometimes we get calls from buyers saying, "Hey, I got a list of 10 houses I want to look at." I mean, that's crazy. You're out of your mind to do that. You're going to be confused, and it's not going to help the process. Once you've determined what you want to buy, it's offer time. Okay, and offer time, what you want to do is you want to determine, first of all, does this house meet your needs? Okay. And, you obviously got to go through your checklist that, is it got the right number of bedrooms that you wanted, the number of bathrooms that you wanted, is it in good condition or does it need work? All of that stuff in terms of does it meet your needs? Once you have determined that, then you have to determine its true value. This is where it's very good to be hooked up with an agent. Okay, with a buyer's agent. He's going to go through the same exercise that the listing agent did when they listed the property. Okay, so they're going to pull what's called a comparative market analysis. This is basically a study of the marketplace in terms of what properties similar to this property have sold for in the very recent past. And then that way, that gives you an idea of what to offer on this property. Okay, so it guides you through the process that you're, all of a sudden, are you overpaying for a property? You don't want to be in that situation. So lean on your agent in terms of what to determine in terms of its true value. Once you've determined its value and you've determined how you're going to tackle the offer, your agent's going to draft the initial offer for you. Now, most people, what we do is we determine the price. We need a price to draft an offer. We need a closing date. We need to know what kind of deposit you're going to be giving them, and we need to know what kind of conditions you're going to be inserting. So a deposit typically in our area, in this KWC, Guelph, Brantford area, is anywhere from, if you go south towards Brantford, it's more like $1,000 to $2,000 deposit. You come into the Cambridge market, it's usually somewhere around $5,000 to $10,000, and you can sort of carry that on into the Kitchener market. In the Waterloo market, it might be a little bit more, and in Guelph, it might be a little bit more. Deposits are typically around $5,000 to $20,000. Okay, now that deposit, we'll talk about that in a second, but that deposit is to accompany the offer to show that you're a bona fide buyer that wants to go ahead with an offer. When you draft your offer, you want to discuss your strategy with your agent. If you're the only buyer at the table, then it's just between you and the seller. So you can discuss how you want to tackle, what do we make our initial offer at? Because that, they're probably going to counter you, or maybe the house is just very aggressively priced. And if you come to the table and the agent says, hey, Mr. Buyer, this property's worth every nickel they're asking. Sometimes we tell people, listen, offer them full price. And then that way you don't have to worry about getting into a multiple offer situation and seeing this thing sell over the top, right? So you want to discuss the strategy of how you're going to tackle the initial offer. Okay. Conditions. We always recommend people go conditional on inspection and conditional on financing. If you have a condition on sale of your property, well, then you've got to do that too. But the one thing you've got to protect yourself is with those conditions. Those conditions, a conditional on financing and inspection, the typical length of time that they normally run is no more than 3 to 5 business days. So you're not going to tie up a house for 2 weeks or a month on those conditions because, you know, the seller's just not going to tolerate it. They're going to assume that, hey, you've got your ducks in a row. I'll give you 3 to 5 days to determine it, and if it doesn't go, then they're going to find another buyer. Now, the condition on sale of property, that usually is somewhere around 2 weeks to 2 months. It just depends on, you know, how saleable your property is. And that is, of course, if you have a property to sell. But being that this is a first-time home buyers webinar, we're not going to worry about that. Once you've determined that, we want to make sure that we propose or present your offer as soon as possible, because, as I said, you don't want to get into a situation where you're competing against other buyers. Now, this brings me to the next slide. Okay, and this is sort of a new phenomenon that's going on in today's marketplace, and that is called Form 244, which is the seller's direction for offers and property. So what the situation here is, as I had mentioned to you earlier, the market is just so low on inventory. There's nothing to buy out there. So the last thing you want to, the last thing the seller wants to do is sell it to the first buyer walking in, because they know that you know, the property is going to sell. So what they want to do is try and get as many buyers in as possible. So they sign with the listing agent what's called a 244 form, and this 244 form basically states, and I'll try and open it up for you in another format here, is if you can see that, it shows that the seller hereby directs that no presentations of offers takes place before this particular time. Okay, and the reason they do that is because obviously they want to make sure that they're not leaving any money on the table. Okay, it creates like a bidding war type of environment. So you see a buyer, you see a property with a form that has a 244 form signed on it, and you know, I just finished telling you to act quickly. Unfortunately, with a 244 form, you can't act quickly. You can only act within the time that the seller wants to see offers. Okay, so that's just a phenomenon that's going on right now, and unfortunately, and it doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon. So you negotiate the offer, you determine what you're going to pay for this place. If you're getting into a 244 form, this is where you see properties selling for astronomical prices above the list price, and folks, this is not unusual. This is normal. So you negotiate it out, and once you get your offer accepted, then this is another step in the process. You get your offer accepted. What's going to happen now is, remember that deposit I was talking to you about? Now it gets cashed. It goes into the real estate listing agent's trust account. So you've got your conditions, if you've got any, okay? And then you determine, you know, you're satisfied with the condition of the property, the bank's giving you the green light, then, you know, that's when things are dealt with. So you get your offer accepted, the deposit is cashed, you complete the financing, you conduct your home inspection, and of course you review the inspection report, make sure that you're satisfied with everything. If something major comes up in the inspection report that you're not happy with, you've got a couple of things to do here. You can either just get out of the deal, or you can try and renegotiate with the seller. Hey, I didn't realize your furnace was on its last legs, or there's a crack in the heat exchanger, or there's mold in the attic, or whatever. You know, you've got to get those fixed. You can try and renegotiate the deal. Even in a multi-member, we were talking about multiple offer situations, you can even end up doing that afterwards. Now, again, just sort of as a preface to that, a lot of times in multiple offer situations, you don't even have the chance of putting in conditions. So this may not even be relevant. But nonetheless, if you do have a condition on inspection, and something major shows up in the inspection report, then you've got the opportunity to renegotiate the deal. Okay? After you've determined you got the financing, after you're satisfied with the inspection, this is where you waive your conditions. So in other words, you're literally taking them right out of the offer, and you are now in what's called a firm and binding contract. So that means you own the house for all intents and purposes. You just don't have possession of it yet. You're going to get possession of it on the day that you determined with the seller in terms of when you're going to get the property. Okay, this is what we call the firm or pending period. okay? After the firm or pending period happens, this is where you hire a lawyer. Now, some people like to hire their lawyer beforehand. Sometimes they like to have the buyer, or I'm sorry, the lawyer look at the agreement before they sign off on it, or maybe they make a conditional on the lawyer's approval. May or may not be necessary. A lot of the buyers I deal with, they don't worry about that. A lot of these clauses are standard as long as it is conditional and the the person is protected. They don't get too fussy about. But this is where the lawyer gets hired. The lawyer at this point needs to be involved in the transaction. What they do is they search title of the property. And what that means is they want to make sure that the taxes are paid, that the mortgage is up to date, that there are no liens on the property. Personally, maybe the seller you're buying from has had issues with maybe CRA, and there's liens on the. They want to make sure that when you get possession of this property, you pick up none of that person's problems. Okay, so there's no mortgage on the property; it's free and clear, and you can get clean title to the property. Okay. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure you get fire insurance. The one thing about getting a mortgage on a property, especially with a mortgage, if you can't get fire insurance on a property, you can't get a mortgage, because no bank in the land will give you a mortgage on a property unless you're able to get fire insurance. So very important to determine that. In fact, so much so that you may even want to consider, depending on, of course, on the age of the house, and lean on your buyer's agent for this, you may even want to consider making your offer conditional on you being able to obtain insurance, okay? Especially on some of those older homes with like knob and tube wiring or with aluminum wiring. A lot of homes built in the 70s. If when you're walking through a property, I'll give you a couple of tricks in terms of trying to figure out the age of the property. First of all, with the 70s properties, typically it's not unusual to find aluminum wiring in these houses. Now, is aluminum wiring bad? It depends. But if there is aluminum wiring in there, first of all, not every lender likes it. So you've got to determine what your options are with that, number one. And number two, not every insurance company likes it. So you got to make sure that if the house has aluminum wiring, there is a specific clause that is actually addressed in there on how to remedy aluminum wiring. And it doesn't always require stripping out all the wiring. It requires some work done by an electrician, but you want to do that. So if it's a house built in the 70s, so a couple of tricks in terms of determining the age. A lot of times, if you've got like a thermal pane window, if you look on the metal portion of the thermal pane window, if you're looking at the window and right at the base of the window before it becomes attached to the wood, a lot of times those things are date stamped. So you look at the date in there. Now, if the windows were replaced, well, then that doesn't work. But if they haven't been, you can see in there. Like the other day, I showed a house, and on the listing it showed that the house was built in 1991. While we're showing this thing, I look at the window stamp, and all the windows are stamped 1974. So I don't know what this agent was thinking, but this house was a whole lot older. And actually, as a result, it had aluminum wiring. The other thing you want to look at is the toilet. Now, a lot of people replace their toilets, especially with 70s houses. You got some pretty funky colors going on with fixtures, right? So a lot of people have swapped those out. But if they haven't, then if you lift the lid of the toilet, when your toilet gets kind of blocked up and you have to lift the lid, lift that lid and just kind of flip it over. And now 9 times out of 10, there's a date stamp on that lid. Now, what that's telling you is the date of the toilet, okay? But the one thing about toilets is toilets are typically not warehoused because they're very fragile, right? So usually what happens is the year that the toilet was built is usually the same year that it's delivered to the marketplace. Okay, so that will, if it's not, bang on, it's only off by maybe 6 months or a year. So that's usually another trick that I look for to determine, the age of a house. So those are kind of the two tricks that I use. All right. The other thing, of course, is the lawyer is going to draft your mortgage. He's the one that's going to draft the mortgage for you as per how the bank has instructed him to draft it. The interest rate, how you're going to pay it back, when is it due in terms of maturity, any penalties that will apply, any prepayment privileges that it has, any rights that you may have in terms of doubling up on payments. He's going to draft all that for you, and then when you go and see him, when you go meet with the lawyer, then he's going to have you sign all that stuff. At the same time, this is where the lawyer proves down payment and of course the conditions, and they execute all the documents, and then the lawyer closes the transaction. All right, you're going to give them all that money. The bank's going to send them the check, and they're going to close the deal. Once the deal closes, okay, you're going to get a call from the lawyer and say, hey, congratulations, you're the new owner of the house. And that is about it. You now own a home. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions, but if you do, I would invite you to either give me a call at the office, 519-624-9222, or you can email me at walter@maximumresults.ca. Okay, thanks very much for showing up tonight, folks. I really appreciate it. I'll leave that screen up for a bit longer, just so you can write down that number and the email address. And that's all I have to say for now. All right, thanks for attending the webinar.